Welcome to another episode of Code for Thought. Software architecture is a wide-ranging field. In the last episode, a group of enterprise architects and I discussed how architecture works on a large scale across an organization, or indeed organizations. In this final episode on software architecture, I want to focus on solutions and what solutions architects do. And for that I was lucky enough to get time with 3 architects from Amazon Web Services, who talk about their experiences in designing and building software solutions. Welcome everybody, and thanks very much for your time, Ro, John and Akash. Before we start our discussion on solutions architecture, could you briefly introduce yourself? Maybe we can start with you, Akash?
Sure. Thanks for having us on, Peter. My name is Akash Giwala, and I'm a solutions architect at Amazon Web Services. And I've been with the company for about a year and a half now. And I'm currently supporting global enterprises in the high-tech industry.
John?
Hi, Peter. It's great to be here. My name is John Majarowitz. I'm also a solutions architect at Amazon Web Services, and I've been here about a year and 3 months. I do have about 35 years of industry experience, including time spent in research and development, time spent as a small company software developer, and time spent as a consultant doing solutions architecture.
And finally, Ro.
Hi, Peter. Thanks for having us today. I'm a solutions architect as well. I've been with Amazon Web Services for about 4.5 years, and I've been a solution architect for longer than that. And I have probably about 15 years of experience in the industry in various roles around solutions architecture, but also management and also in delivery services and things of that nature.
So before we go into the discussions, I would like to get a kind of a feel for you what you think solutions architect is and architecture is, and what a solutions architect actually does.
I'll go first. I think the main idea is end-to-end responsibility for the solution. So you're really responsible for covering all aspects: the platform stack, the servers, the application design, networking, performance, security, efficiency. At the end of the day, you may have specialists that work in certain areas, but if you don't have a specialist covering that area, then ultimately the responsibility lands on you as a solutions architect to make sure it gets covered.
I would say, from my perspective, a solutions architect is somebody who's good at playing with building blocks. The ultimate goal is to have a good enough understanding of each of those building blocks and understanding of how they can be assembled so that the whole becomes greater than the sum of the parts.
Yeah, and from my perspective, a solutions architect, or it's sometimes called a pre-sales engineer or a sales engineer at different companies, depending on where you go. The main goal is to just help the customer achieve their business objective, and that can be through, building, like Ro mentioned, or overviewing the solution and gathering requirements, as John mentioned. I like to describe it as the technical liaison between the customer and, another business.
Right, I think we've got quite a wide range of stuff. So how much coding do you think is actually involved in that, as a follow-up question?
I was going to say, for me, it's more of the scheme of the solution. I think in order to get to the point where you become a solutions architect, you have to do a lot of coding. But once you become a solutions architect, the degree to which you code can vary. I believe it's important to continue to write some amount of code for prototyping, evaluation of technology, and for those purposes. Ultimately, the solutions we support are software products, and staying relevant in software is important. But in terms of writing product code, that can be time consuming. And I think you have to balance that against the other responsibilities at times.
Yeah, I would say that in respect to how much coding is required, I would say it's as much or as little as you want or as your customer project requires. So it really varies. I would say there's a wide spectrum of how much coding the solutions architects do here. Some don't do much and some do a lot, but what I would say is that the type of code that you write is very different than the type of code you write as a developer, because the goals are different too. So as a solutions architect, you're really shooting for speed. So you're gonna write code quickly to prove a point, or to build a quick demo, as opposed to writing highly efficient library code.
Just to add to what Ro was saying, an important point to highlight is that a lot of times we're just doing proof of concepts for customers and we're not actually doing the implementation in production for the customers. That's what a consultant kind of role would do oftentimes. So it's actually faster for us to spin up MVPs or POCs or demos.
Solutions architecture or software architecture is still a little bit of a fuzzy term, isn't it? How did you actually get into it? Because we have courses and education programs for software developers. There's no shortage of people who want to go into Python and who want to do some mobile app development, etc. But how did you actually get into solutions architecture? So was there a course that you took, or is that something that you actually just grew into?
For me, I only encountered the term solutions architect or solutions architecture when I came into AWS or applied to the role, really. So I graduated from university. I did an undergrad in information systems, and that covered a lot of business and IT concepts. So thinking like databases, computer networking, application development, and then from the business side, project management, accounting, economics, etc. And I applied to Amazon through a program that they actually have for people with a couple years of work experience or fresh university grads.
Mm.
And that's the program where they taught us about AWS as well as the different roles that support AWS, such as solutions architect. It just happened to be a good fit. That's
Mhm.
how I got into it.
Kind of a little different from me. I started my career as a systems engineer, eventually became a software developer, and then became a software architect, a data architect, and eventually what we would call a solutions architect. So for me, it was an evolution over time.
Yeah, so very different path, and you'll find that there's a high degree of diversity in the path that lead to solutions architecture. I started off as a network engineer with a professional services organization. So my job really consisted more in configuring appliances for network related purposes, and then I covered different technologies. I moved on to doing the same thing with virtual machines and virtual infrastructure, but I was always in a professional services post sales type of capacity. After that, I even took management roles also in professional services post sales still, until that moment where I felt like I explored the post sales world enough that I want to see something else, and I want to see what
Mhm.
was upstream from that. I want to see where the ideas were actually coming from, and so that's when I decided to make the switch to something that was a lot more upstream. That's what led me to solutions architecture.
Solutions architecture itself can be quite a wide range. And I think since we're talking about Amazon Web Services, a lot of the solutions that will be cloud solutions. There are also on-premise solutions, where people are actually hosting their own applications online. And maybe we can talk a little bit about the differences between the kind of different work that you would do as a solutions architect for cloud solutions and on-premise solutions.
To me, I think the basic principles, they don't change that much. It's still software solutions, but there is an important difference. The clouds offer a greater number and variety of like platform services that you're really not going to find within an on-premises oriented IT organization. So, like for example, if you want to take storage on all cloud providers, they're going to provide the opportunity to use object storage. And that's something that you typically wouldn't see in an on-premises environment as much. Another example, on the AWS cloud, we have multiple types of database platforms. So there's relational, but there's key value, there's graph, there's document, there's in memory, there's blockchain, there's time series, and on and on. Because you have all of those possibilities, you have to be more aware of what to use and when to use it. And
Mm.
you just wouldn't have that amount of variety in an on-premises setting.
So the difference really boils down to the kind of variety and the scaling of the solution between cloud and on-premise. So
Exactly. The essence of the solution remains the same, but the variety of choices is the difference.
Just wanted to add that so from my perspective, there's also a little shift in the mindset, because what I recall from starting a project back in the on-premises world, one of the first things we used to do a walkthrough of the customer's data center, and we used to stare at empty racks for some time and discuss where the servers were going to be and how we would patch them on the network and things of that nature. So everything used to be a lot more tangible in that respect, and now things are a lot more dematerialized, if that makes sense, and a lot
Mm.
more abstract, actually abstracted behind APIs. I think that that little shift of mindset is something that's a little mind blowing at first. The fact that you transition from having to physically visit a data center and and plan the layout in the racks, and compared to now where you can just deploy the same infrastructure over and over in multiple countries in just a matter of hours, if not minutes, is really a big shift in paradigm.
Do you still see a big request for on-premise solutions then as a solutions architect? Is there, from your perspective, a case to be made where on-premise solutions might actually be better?
I think the main need for on-premise that I've seen, or that I can think of off the top of my head, would be for compliance purposes, or it's very specific business needs or requirements.
Yeah, we'll see also maybe some hybrid examples where you may have devices that have to remain on premise. Take a factory setting where you're monitoring, but then all your backend can be cloud resident. And really, when you're talking about computing resources, storage resources, the cloud is the environment for where the future is in doing that type of work. But there'll always be a need for kind of that front end collection aspect that will be tangibilized as being on premises.
Yeah, Peter, I think overall the more and more customers are seeing cloud as the new normal. So they have this cloud first approach when they develop a new application. Typically, they think about putting it in the cloud first if possible, and only if they have specific compliance requirements, for example, as Akash mentioned, do they revert back to on premises. But those use cases are becoming more and more rare, in my opinion. And what you'll find on premises is legacy applications that customers haven't been able to move yet, but really it seems to be just a matter of when and not if.
I would like to move on a little bit to the kind of work that a solutions architect does from your perspective and give people a flavor of how that works. Is there kind of an example where you can demonstrate, well, this is how I approach things as a solutions architect?
So, for example, a customer of mine, they used to have many applications running on premises, and those applications were separate, and they had all those applications, they had their own copy of the data, which was kind of inefficient in respect to storage, but also it was very hard to maintain because every time the data was changing, they had to change it in multiple places, and it was very, very hard to keep it in sync. We came up with the idea that it would be nice to have a central repository for that data, and that all the applications around it could go to that repository and grab the data they needed. So we came up with this concept of building a central data lake for this customer and have all those applications living right outside at the edge of this data lake and expose the data via an API. The upside of doing this was that we no longer needed multiple copies of the data. Things were a lot easier to maintain and to scale also. So as a solutions architect, the way you approach this is, first of all, you try to get the lay of the land and understand what the customer has and how they're doing things today. Understand the pain points and their requirements, where they would like to go from here. Understanding that you also have to bring in your vision as a solutions architect. Based on those requirements, work backwards from there, and it ties back into what I was telling you early on with the building blocks, right? So once we have that final picture of what the ideal solution would look like, you need to devise a plan and understand which of those building blocks you're going to use and how they can interact with one another. That takes some whiteboarding and some testing, some prototyping. Sometimes you have to prove a concept, and sometimes you bring in an SME who's very deep on a very particular area of the solution. And ultimately, you have a final design and a concept proven, and you can move on to the actual implementation phase.
I'll bring up another example. I had a customer who built a solution that was related to monitoring of vehicles. Automobile telemetry was collected, and that was brought into the cloud. It was using message queues in order to do the collection, and the various processing tasks were decoupled through additional message queues. It was based on object storage, as well as it used a key value database. It then was based also on AWS Elastic Container Services, which allows a microservices-based architecture to be designed very easily, and then included a web tier as well as an analytics tier. So this was a very comprehensive solution that was cloud-based, and it was fairly easy to design, as Ro was saying, kind of from that building blocks perspective, using cloud services.
So it starts basically with the design phase where you iterate, you start off with a concept, and at the end of that, you come up with a design. As a solutions architect, are you then also overseeing the implementation?
The front end, I think, is the more significant portion of your time. And I like to think in terms of what I call architecturally significant requirements. So you pay attention to those things that drive architecture. And there is more than one way to skin a cat, so to speak. So you do have options and alternatives. You iterate through that, and then you land on the solution. You also have a lot of stakeholders. So you have to be a good communicator, and you have to be able to make sure that people understand the alternatives, the vision, the design, buy into it. The predominance of your work is upfront, but you have to support your work all the way through the life cycle of the development.
Yeah, it's pretty typical, at least from our experiences, to hold like office hours for a customer or ensure that we're checking in on them to, just see the updates on their progress and just ensuring that we're there. So it's not just like in the initial stages, we're there from start to finish.
Yeah, it's not the case that we come up with a design and then we give it to somebody else to implement and we never hear from it again. I think that feedback loop is very important for us. So that's why, as John was saying, we stay engaged from cover to cover so that we can follow through. And sometimes also we have to make adjustments. Things don't necessarily always work as well as we expected. Sometimes they also work better, but it's very important to get that feedback loop. And Peter, to your point, it can be a bit of an iterative process where we have to go back to the drawing board sometimes and iterate over and over for optimization purposes.
It's the kind of skill set that I'm interested in because as developers, we've got our engineering hats on. And I think that a lot of that, all of that goes obviously into the design. But there is something that John just mentioned, and you, Ro, and Akash as well, that, you need to get people on board. You need to communicate it in the right way. So how do you know that you got people on board?
For me, when you start hearing people echo back the right ideas around the solution, you've made that connection. And I think that's important to try to actively listen and pay attention to making sure you're hearing the right thing back.
To get people's buy-in, typically the methodology we follow here at Amazon Web Services is to be as data-driven as possible. We like to benchmark things and then be able to compare, have metrics that we can use to compare whether the solution we came up with is either more performant, more reliable. The idea is that the numbers speak for themselves, so it becomes clear to every stakeholder that this is the way to go, or this is not the way to go.
Yeah, I was just gonna add on to what Ro and John were saying to get to that point that John was describing of knowing that you've earned their trust. One of the leadership principles we have at Amazon is earning trust, and we do that as a solutions architect through gathering the requirements. And when I say gathering the requirements, I mean like really understanding where the customer is at, where they want to get to, what problems they're trying to solve, and keeping the customer obsession in mind and not pivoting from that.
The stakeholder management, that's obviously quite an important part, as well as John earlier said, the active listening and the listening skills that you need to bring along. Which brings me to a question, because all of these are skills that we actually need to teach people who want to be architects. Therefore, I would like to move a little bit on to the next subject and the final subject in this episode, which is how do we train a solutions architect and the career paths that they have. If you look back to your careers, is there actually anything that you would have appreciated from your training courses or the on-the-job learning that would have prepared you better for becoming an architect?
Coming from university straight into the role that I'm in today at AWS, and I entered through a program which I mentioned earlier, which is called Tech U at AWS. When you join that program for the first 6 months, Peter, all you're doing is learning the services that correspond to different areas of technology, such as AI, ML, big data, networking, security, etc. And you practice with your peers doing mock customer conversations, presenting demos, building solutions, and presenting those to your peers who are pretending to be the role of the customer or alumni from the program. I did not see that at my university and any of my friends' universities. It's like one of those things I'll add to the list. Like, they should also teach you to do your taxes in school, and just basic life skills. But yeah, I think it would be beneficial to have courses in the future, going forward, to kind of create that environment that nurtures technical sales people, or people who can leverage their skills no matter what context it's in, whether it's technical or not or something else, but leveraging it in a sales context or a customer context where you're talking to people, getting those skills taught to you rather than just waiting to get to the job and having to learn it on the job. It would be good to have that as a foundational part in academia.
For me, it was a bit of a journey. When I started my career, I was a technologist, and the first few years you're working hands-on. And I really, really liked that. I enjoyed remaining technically focused. As you gain more experience, there's kind of the idea of the management path, and it pulls you away from that technical focus should you pursue it. And for me, there was a struggle because success was kind of defined in terms of management mobility, yet my desire was to remain technically focused. And I struggled with that for a few years. And it took me a while to become comfortable that, deciding the best path that appealed to me is, remaining technically focused and understanding that that can be an adequate career and a successful career was something I had to become comfortable with. And I would encourage people to, make that decision as to what's best for you and understand you can be successful. The good news is if you do choose to remain on the technical track as an individual contributor, like I have, you can still prosper. You can still be a leader, and you can also have a lot of enjoyment in your profession. So if that's what appeals to you, don't fight against it. Go with it and feel comfortable.
I'm just going to add a little bit more onto that. I think raising awareness is the biggest thing, or that's an actionable step that can be taken now by universities and colleges to make students aware of that kind of diversity that John was talking about, that diversity in roles in technology. So I think a lot of times when you think comp sci or comp engineering, it's software development, and not too many people know about the other roles, especially pre-sales. I think there's zero awareness. Having this podcast, for example, is a good way of doing that at your university, Peter.
Yeah, what I would add also is I know a lot of people that think they're not ready for solutions architecture because they look at it and they think there's just so much to it. You need to have a business acumen, you need to be able to give presentations, you need to be highly technical, you need to know network security, databases, containers, you name it. It's not necessarily the case. If we look at our team, you'll find that everybody comes with a specific background, and nobody comes with a good coverage of the whole gamut. So some of the folks here, the guy that sits behind me is a network expert. The guy sitting on my left is very deep on security. The guy in front of me is very good at giving presentations. So there is not an expectation that day one you should be able to cover all aspects of the job very, very well. Actually, I don't know of any architects that's able to do that even after years on the job. So that's why there's many of us covering the same customers. We complement one another, and we bring multiple strengths to the team. Yeah, I guess the message is, don't think you don't have the right background to become an architect, because there is no such thing as the right background.
I think that's a very good summary. So, first of all, be brave and actually go for it if you really want to do it. And I kind of sympathize also with John because I had a very similar experience in my career. So you start off as an engineer, and very often the path is, if you go up the ladder, then you end up in management and you kind of lose track of what you actually love doing, which is programming or something technology related. And architecture actually gives you that kind of pathway. So That's a very helpful summary from three of you. Thanks very much for that. When you want to start as an architect, what would you recommend that people should do in order to get into it? Is there anything specific that you can think of, or is it just sort of throw your lot in at the next job application or talk to your manager that this is what you would like to do? So what would you recommend people do if they want to pursue a career in this?
Like the path Akash has from the beginning of his career, working in the architecture area, and that's one path. Another path is kind of a little more starting out as a software engineer, software programmer, writing enough code so you kind of understand what's good to do, what isn't to do, right? Spend a few years doing that. During the course of doing that, you need to learn to think critically, especially about requirements, right? The role that you should be playing, that improving and refining them, and so on and so forth. You're going to be assigned tasks and you're going to dive deep into the work that you're doing, but you need to think critically across the entire scope of your project and your solution. Look at the work that other people are doing, even though you're not responsible for it. Ask questions. Be willing to take initiative. Be willing to speak up. Be willing to admit when you're wrong. That's a very important property. Be willing to challenge others. Allow others to challenge you. Those are all really necessary ingredients if you're going to be successful as a solutions architect. I think Ro hit the nail on the head when he says there's many paths that you can take to get there. But I would say that the one most important thing is that you really, really enjoy the journey along the way.
And I would want to emphasize, in a technical way, at least, computer networking is pretty important. Speaking to Ro and his previous experience, just having a lay of the land of an infrastructures on premise or cloud, architecture, and knowing where the servers are, how those communicate to each other. Those topics are pretty essential as well in your development.
Yeah, I had something different. So I can't tell you what to do. However, I think I can tell you one of the things not to do if you start off as a solutions architect. Don't sweat the old stuff. Don't worry so much about, because at first you're going to be drinking from the fire hose for some time, and you might be tempted, as I was when I started here, to catch up with, for example, all the services or features that have been released before I started my journey. I felt like I needed to go back in time pretty much and catch up. And I think that was a mistake in hindsight, because a lot of that stuff by the time I got to it was almost irrelevant. I would say start with what's new, what's groundbreaking, and what's the future. Look forward, look ahead, and don't do what I did. Don't go back in time.
I hope this mini-series on architecture gave you a useful overview of the field and a flavor of what architects do. With software engineering growing in research at the rate it is at the moment, I hope we can learn a little bit from our colleagues in the private sector, whether it is in developing career paths for engineers, or whether it is how to approach solutions for complex engineering tasks. In the next episode, however, we look at a different aspect of research software engineering: applications for mobile devices. And this is a recorded panel discussion as part of the online Saucy events from earlier this year. I hope you'll tune in then, and with that, goodbye.